Bend your mic, Karin.
How's this?
That's better.
Better? Okay. How lovely that so many people like blueback herring. At the end of this, your head might hurt because it's too much information. 30 years, you know, let's squeeze into 15 minutes. Let's go. Let's try to go. Let's go. Go.
Wait a minute.
There we go. Okay, let's see if we can actually go back and forth. Okay, so it looks like it's working now. Okay, so little blueback herring have a pretty large geographic range, as you can see here. They're one of 6 anadromous herrings in North America. And I'm not going to talk too much about their population decline and things like that, but some of you might know about that. I'm going to talk about my own personal journey with them and how I've dragged students in along the way. And as I said, your head might hurt from too much information. Oh yeah, so they're interesting in the Hudson River watershed because they also sneak up into the Mohawk, which has been a point of discussion amongst the DEC people a lot. But my interest in them came from when I was working at the Ecosystem Research Center at Cornell back in the 80s, and I was sort of starting to vaguely think about maybe going back to grad school vaguely. But I noticed that amongst all these, you know, we were looking at all these year class reports and utility reports and stuff, and I noticed that this herring, and I'm half Swedish, so I have this affinity for herring, and so I noticed that this one was in the top 10, in fact it was in the top 5. So I knew it had to be kind of important. And then also, you know, I started meeting the DEC people, getting their reports, and I saw that blueback herring was extremely abundant. It was really, really abundant, and so it seemed to me as an ecosystem science person that maybe they would be playing an important role in the system. So I wanted to work on them. When I finally got talked into going back to my PhD, but one of my committee members said, they're not economically important, so forget it, study shad. So that's why I did that. But they also turned out to be interested. But some of my first studies I did was as a Polgar student. Back then, you could be at any academic student rank. So I was an early PhD student, and I made this little figure from my Polgar fellowship, and you can see this was my early studies. And then when I came to ESF, so I'm bouncing around a little bit, but when I came to ESF in the beginning, I managed to get 2 grants to study blueback herring, which overwhelmed me. But I had this student, Ian Blackburn, and we did some work together on fecundity and also looking at the energetics. So I just wanted to show a little bit of that. So that's ground up blueback herring in those files. We did some bioenergetics, some energy density measurements, and you can then you can see what happens over time, how they lose energy as they move up the river and spawn. But it actually turns out to be a lot less of an investment than it is in a unidirectional flow. We also studied that later, but I didn't include that stuff. So they actually do ride the tides. They get a big energy subsidy out of that. But I want to think about blueback herring as biogeochemical phenomena, or interactors, shall we say. And so that's kind of a lot of my background. And so I think about them as interacting in the environment that they're in with all of the different nutrient fluxes and elemental fluxes and things like that. So to just start off then, many of you probably have done some work with stable isotopes. They're just stable isotopes are the ones that don't exhibit radioactive decay, undergo radioactive decay. And we work with the advantage of just tiny differences in the mass. So this is just one neutron heavier than this, but we get a lot of mileage out of it because that changes the interactions in the chemical reactions. For this presentation, I just want you to know that the delta 15N, so the tiny shifts in the ratios of the heavy to lighter isotope of nitrogen happen as they go up the food web, or if there's a different baseline. That's something that's important in the Hudson watershed. And then the delta 13C gives us information on whether they're in where they are, more or less location. And for us, it's going to be mostly marine and fresh water. So now we're going to have a little potpourri of things that I've seen. So this is one of my early studies. IESF, this was with Ian. And one thing that we saw here was, these are, see if this thing will work. These are adults that came in to spawn, Hudson and Mohawk. And you see they have a pretty good marine signature here. These are young deer collected in 2001 from the Hudson, and you also see that they separate pretty well from the Mohawk young deer. You see a little bit of interaction here. This fish here was, although caught in the Hudson, was probably a Mohawk fish on its way out to sea. Another thing we can see is like the ocean signal of the adults that come in. Right, I put a little asterisk on there for a reason. But here we see, so these symbols here are from what they brought in with them when they were caught. We sampled muscle tissue. And this one here, I think it's back to one of the previous speakers. This is, without a doubt, a reflection of the changed food web during that marine heat wave. Because they were caught in 2013, we know that the heat wave continued through the winter too. And we see that it's different from the 2016 fish, but I also want to point out that these guys over here, they were in the river. They were Mohawkers that were, they fished and swum up into the Mohawk, caught much later by Scott, thank you probably very much, and then they stayed and fed in unidirectional flow, and they changed their tissues turned over. So with these biogeochemical markers, they can be taken up from the environment. They can also be physiological. So that's a big part of what we think about in this world. But otoliths are often used to quantify markers because of these properties. And this is I don't know if Wes is here, but this is an otolith from a yearling that Wes gave me this bag in 2025 or 2012. He gave me this bag. Here, take this. I caught these at the Troy Dam, and this is very clearly a yearling fish. And if you look at this otolith, if you blow it up a little bit, we can see this winter zone on it there. So it was just clearly had overwintered and then came up the river. It was caught in Troy, New York. We took this otolith, or I took this otolith, and I ran a laser transect across it and fed that ablative material into a mass spectrometer. And when you do that, you can look at various trace elements. Typically, we look at trace elements in otoliths in ratio to strontium. And what we see here is this is the beginning of life here, and the otolith grows allometrically outward from that. And this fish, I can tell, and Justin can too, that this was born in the Hudson River and moved out, as opposed to Mohawk, and moved out to sea. And here on this edge, you can see that it actually, the strontium, which is higher at sea than it is in freshwater, started to drop down as it moved up. Well, this one here is one of my even earlier papers where I used this property and I looked at, I was very interested in these yearlings. What are they doing in the system up at the Troy Dam, you know, or very close to the Troy Dam. And I was just totally surprised with this sort of isotope map here. The open circle here was 5, sort of my reference point was 5 adult American shad, and so that's kind of a good marine signature. But you see everything else is crazy around here. And all these other things here were transects I did with an electron microprobe of strontium-calcium ratios, and you can see anything that jumps up has probably gone to sea. But some of these fish went out and came back. Some of them never saw marine water at all. Yearling fish, what are they doing, right? So then, later on, getting into some work in Providence with Sarah Turner, Sarah did an amazing amount of work looking at Hudson, Mohawk, Long Island, and then beyond that for her dissertation. But here is at the beginning, we started collecting water for developing a geochemical atlas. So these were her water sampling sites. You can see it was New York, it was the Hudson-Mohawk, and Long Island Sound, or Long Island estuaries too. And her work is published. I'm not going to reference it. These are the markers that she kept track of, and they often are very good for tracking provenance. It's ratios of strontium. It's an isotope of oxygen, isotope ratio of oxygen, strontium, and barium. I'm not going to go through right now what they all mean, but follow the fact that the red dots and the green, everything is color-coded for a quick She also then collected a lot of fish. She did a canonical analysis and found that they separated quite well. You can see Long Island separates out really nicely. The tributaries separated nicely over 2 years. The upper Hudson and the estuary kind of overlap each other. And the otoliths followed suit, basically. That's the story there. But then, you know, I wanted to get into this a little bit more because of the DEC's interest. Where was I born? The Hudson and the Mohawk. And there's another flavor of geochemistry, which is to look at strontium isotopes. These are actually radioisotopes, but they have a half-life of something like 1 billion years. But they are actually used for aging rocks, for dating rocks. And bulk strontium to calcium also has clues as well. But for this, you have to get your head into some geology. What's the geologic disposition of New York State? And we can see that there are different rocks of different ages. And so we can see that the oldest rocks are in the Adirondack Massif. The younger rocks are marine deposits in the Mohawk Valley, and you've got kind of this complex mix in the Hudson. So we can take advantage of that. We can actually take an otolith and run an Appalachian transect across it, or you can map it. Remember, that's the core in there. So that would be here. And we can see that there's elevated strontium isotopes. That's the blue. And that means it's old rock. Okay, so it's from like the Adirondacks or something like that. And then I think to save money, we only do partial transects with the strontium isotopes because it's very expensive. And so then, by following down this way, you can see that it goes down and then kind of flips up again and goes down. And this is the marine, that's marine strontium signal. It's pretty uniform around the world. You can also simultaneously look at the bulk strontium, not just the isotope ratios, but the bulk in ratios to calcium. And what we see here is, again, this is very, very low here, but then it goes whoop on both sides, right? And then drops down. So that whoop is going out to sea the first winter. It's different from the Mohawk. The Mohawk looks very different. So this is kind of, looks a lot more like that marine end, right? Over here, but it's noisier. And then the red, the bulk strontium to calcium, is kind of a wiggly, noisy thing, but then has a dip when they go through the Hudson out to sea. And you can see that here too. You can see how when the strontium dips down in the lower Hudson River estuary, the strontium isotopes go up. I told you your head's going to hurt at the end of this. And so then Hudson River origin fish had this other, you know, like a different signature. It's kind of in between the Mohawk and this is the estuary, really. So it's kind of, it's receiving waters from both sides. And you can see sort of other similar dynamics in here, but this is what I started getting interested in. These little dips down here. So first this fish went out to sea, and then it came back in, right? So how common is this? This is what I call non-textbook migration. And so here's a picture that when I was with Scott Wells up at the Troy Dam, we caught a lot of these, and I guess every time you go up there, probably during spawning season, you see stuff like this, right? And so the strontium calcium ratio showed that they had migrated up from the sea. So again, 250 kilometers, what are they doing up there, right? So this is our textbook anatomy, right? 2 minutes. Oh, I knew I wasn't going to get through much. So textbook anatomy, and then what we can see is that what are they doing there? We know that they what came up from the sea also because they were covered with marine copepods. So the quick answer here was that these guys, a lot of them returned back from the sea. Lots and lots, both in 1999 and 2012. That's a very overlooked behavior. I think, oh yes, Curiosity Corner. I think I can squeeze this in. So what did they do? What are similarities between biogeochemical markers? I think I'm going to just race through this. So Kara did a lot of work on this to try to understand what went on in the last year of life. That's this outside portion of the odor. So she did fancy analyses. We came up with a mixing curve to Dogod salinity ratios, and we found out that these fish Some of them went out to sea, had been out to sea their last winter of life, but others, a lot stayed in the river. And so there seems to be a lot of estuarine wandering amongst these fish. The other curiosity corner is why do some of these markers, what do they mean in terms of similarities? So we see, this is stable isotope ratios of different dates and years, and in particular, look at the recent one. Those are all in the same, a few days apart, but there's more similarity within a date and place than there is outside, which suggests to me that maybe these guys are coherent, going in schools together. And then this is from work that I did with Justin. I just want to point out that this is, again, obscure biochemistry, but that you see that most of these fish align on this plot this way, but here's a group that align this way. And this group here all came from one little sample that Justin took and labeled it the K series. And what does that mean? And these were actually not totally uniform, but consistent throughout life, suggesting to me that maybe there's a genetic thing going on. So finally, the forefront might be more complete understanding of the at-sea part of this life. So looking at these kinds of patterns, this might be going up to the Gulf of Maine, for example. This might be hugging the coastline, maybe going down to the Chesapeake or something like that. And maybe these are hanging on. So what we've learned is that they pick up these biogeochemical signatures. Their life histories are very individualistic. Maybe, though, there's some coherence, maybe even from birth, who knows, or something like that. And so we've gotten a lot of insights about these complex fish and their migrations. And I think I'm in overtime, right? Okay. We'll take questions afterwards, right?
2 minutes for some questions.
Oh, we do have 2 minutes. You were holding off on me. Yeah. Oh, you didn't go so fast.
You did great, Karin, don't worry.
So you answered my question, why strontium and calcium, why is that important?
So strontium is actually relatively abundant in the environment, and it's a minor element, not a trace element. And many watersheds are depleted in strontium relative to the ocean. So it's often a very good marker. It's not always a good marker. Like Syracuse is on Onondaga Lake, which it's on marine bedrock, and it's just loaded with strontium.
My question was, you indicated where that those things were important biomarkers for whether they're from the Mohawk or the Hudson River. But what about boron and magnesium, which you presented also as
That's a great question. I don't know the answer, except that I know that magnesium has something to do with metabolic status. I wrote a very strange paper about that one time. And then boron, I found interesting here because I've been following boron in my work in the Baltic Sea, and it's boron here in these fish is the only other population I've seen besides one very oddball cod population in the Baltic that has really high boron. But those fish that had high magnesium had very low boron. And I don't know. I mean, I do these measurements, I can't always tell what's going on. Sometimes it takes years to figure it out. Amanda, do you have a question?
It's fine. I'll talk to you after. Keep going. I do, yes.
Pardon? Oh, it should be the after.
I said more.
So this was the opening act for Justin Hearn. We'll wait for the crowds to come in, but our next speaker is Justin Hearn, and he's on deck now.
Hey, sorry. Well, I was answering his question. Sorry, sir. Which one's the pointer? Ah, excellent. You're good to go. Good to go. All right, I'm still shaking. I did competitive color guard for about 7 years of my life, and I performed